Welcome to Tokyo Wave, recorded in a live studio in Harajuku, Japan, with your hosts Aaron and Parker. All right, everyone, welcome to episode 116 of Tokyo Wave. We're your hosts Aaron Randall
and Parker Allen. Today we are joined by a special guest, Benjamin Boas, writer, translator, Cool Japan producer, global communications specialist, and mahjong expert.
On Tokyo Wave, we bring you weekly updates from our studio in Harajuku.
Join us in segments featuring this week's top news,
political happenings,
business,
and other random stuff.
To get us started, here are this week's top news highlights.
Japan to scrap current non-digital health insurance cards in 2024.
Japan Lawyers Group requests court order to dissolve Unification Church.
Japan YouTuber Diet members' prolonged overseas absence opens can of legal worms. This week in Japan.
All right, let's get started with our top news item this week. Japan to scrap current non-digital health insurance cards in 2024.
Kyoto News has reported that the Japanese government said on October 13th it will scrap, in principle, health insurance cards in fall 2024 and integrate them into the My Number national identification system.
According to the plan, My Number cards will become mandatory as Japan's health insurance system covers all residents. The move is part of efforts to promote cards issued under the ID system, which has proven unpopular with only half of the population currently carrying them.
Digital Minister Taro Kono told a press conference that the government will also consider moving up the date for integrating driver's licenses into the system from the current goal of the end of fiscal 2024.
The plan to integrate driver's license data into the national ID system was announced in June 2020. The digital agency said Japan is, at this point, not considering abolishing the current format of licenses.
The My Number card system, launched in 2016, issues a 12-digit number to each citizen and foreign resident in Japan to incorporate a range of personal data such as information related to taxes and social security. As part of efforts to push the country's digitalization, the government aims to have almost all citizens obtain My Number cards by March 2023. However, only 49% had created and collected cards as of the end of September, partly because people remain concerned about leakages of personal information.
So Aaron, do you have a My Number card?
I think I got it in the mail, and I have no idea where it is now. But I use my insurance card all the time.
Yeah, so you got that's actually not the My Number card though. The My Number card you have to apply for and has your photo on it.
Oh, really?
What you got actually is the My Number notification card.
Oh, really?
And so that went to everybody, and you use that to apply for a My Number card, but you have to attach a photo and write down all this information. It's a big pain in the ass, basically.
I had no idea.
Well, now you do.
You know, I bet a lot of people get mixed up on that.
Yeah, I know about the process, but I also do not have a My Number card because you know what? I have too many damn cards. I don't want another card.
Same here, same here.
Up next, Japan Lawyers Group requests court order to dissolve Unification Church.
The Mainichi has reported that a lawyers group in Japan, supporting former followers of the Unification Church, has requested that the justice and education ministers, as well as the prosecutor general, demand that a court order the religious group to dissolve.
The National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Sales, that's an interesting organization name, posted the requests by mail on October 11th. The attorneys group told a news conference in Tokyo later that day that the Unification Church's numerous organized illegal acts, including coerced donations, have been recognized in civil lawsuits. They added that while the Agency for Cultural Affairs remains reluctant to request a court order, it is technically possible.
The Cultural Affairs Agency has indicated that a court order to dissolve the controversial religious group, formerly known as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, great name, is, quote, difficult at this time, citing precedents in which such court orders were issued because of penal code violations and other organizations' representative directors.
Yaso Kawai, Secretary General of the National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Cells, wow, that's a mouthful, told the news conference, the church is infringing on its followers' property rights and freedom of religion. There are many legal precedents and cases that ended in settlements showing the illegality of coerced donations, arguing that these could serve as the basis for demanding a court order.
Kawai also revealed that in civil suits against the church, at least in cases where courts handed down rulings, the religious group had been ordered to pay a total of over 1.5 billion yen, roughly 10.3 million US dollars, in compensation. In cases that ended in settlements, meanwhile, the amount of compensation from the church had reached 11.4 billion yen. That's 78 million in total.
Wow. So they're getting all these people to donate them money by any means possible.
Don't they do that in America all the time, though, at churches?
Kinda.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with a Japanese friend. I mean, it's kind of commonplace in America. We're really used to this, right?
Yeah, it's like, church is demanding donations from its followers. How's the weather?
Yeah. All right, and up next, Japan YouTuber Diet member's prolonged overseas absence opens can of legal worms.
The Mainichi has also reported Japanese YouTuber Gassi, who was elected to Japan's House of Councilors on the ticket of the NHK party, remains overseas and has not attended Diet sessions, with reports earlier this year that he was residing in Dubai. The head of the Chamber's Committee on Rules and Administration has requested that he quickly return to Japan and appear in the Diet.
Gassi. Okay. Many people think that Gassi, whose real name is Yoshikazu Higashitani, should step down as a Diet member if he has no record of activities in his elected role. If he continues to remain absent, it is possible that the Upper House Committee on Discipline could discuss punishment, including expelling him as a member of the chamber. But this is no simple matter.
Being voted in carries a great deal of significance for any candidate, not just Gassi. This is because it is the will of the people, which is the greatest value in a democracy. Diet members, in principle, have immunity from arrest during Diet sessions, though they can be arrested when caught in the act of a crime or when the House approves of it. This is stipulated in Articles 50 of Japan's Constitution, which states, "Except in cases provided by law, members of both houses shall be exempt from apprehension while the Diet is in session, and any members apprehended before the opening of the session shall be freed during the term of the session upon demand of the House."
Article 51 of the Supreme Law further stipulates, "Members of both houses shall not be held liable outside the House for speeches, debates, or votes cast inside the House."
These constitutional stipulations are designed to protect the status of Diet members. It has been common throughout history and around the world, not to mention in Russia, for members of parliament to be arrested over words and actions that are unfavorable to the government. To ensure that such a thing never happens, Diet members in Japan are protected to a degree that may seem excessive at first glance.
Regarding the expulsion of Diet members, the second clause of Article 58 of the Constitution states, "Each house shall establish its rules pertaining to meetings, proceedings, and internal discipline, and may punish members for disorderly conduct. However, in order to expel a member, a majority of 2/3 or more of those members present must pass a resolution thereon." A majority of 2/3 rather than a simple majority is a high hurdle, but still, there are deep-rooted views that this stipulation should be applied with caution.
The NHK party says that Gassi is not returning to Japan because he will carry out his activities as a Diet member while living overseas. We cannot easily claim that his actions do not constitute political activities. There is a wide scope for determining what kind of activities are political, and if it turns out he is not doing his job satisfactorily, then the public has the option of voting him out in the next election.
How much does the average Diet member make, salary-wise?
It's a good chunk of change. I think it's somewhere between 15 to 20 mil a year.
I mean, he's just working remote in Dubai.
Yeah, as a Diet member.
Yeah. Imagine if that happened in the U.S.
But the thing is, the Diet isn't set up for Zoom meetings. So
Right.
He can't attend the Diet virtually. He can't attend committee meetings. All he can do is, keep posting YouTube videos and...
of himself partying in Dubai.
Yeah.
Hey, if he can get away with it.
I gotta say, though, this is uncharted territory, and it just really sort of puts another black mark on the NHK party, which is perennially controversial. And to be honest, its leader is kind of a racist, and most of the members that they choose are weird or wacky. Obviously, YouTuber, big surprise there. But every country has its weird political organizations, and sometimes they actually get voted in. But it's I think it's an unfortunate thing for Japanese democracy to have some kind of mockery like this take place.
Good point. All right, and up next, we have a special guest interview with Benjamin Boas.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Tokyo Wave.
Benjamin Boas is a writer, editor, and translator in addition to being a Cool Japan producer and mahjong expert. He is the author of 2, about to be 3, Japanese language books on Japanese culture and education, published by top publishers, with titles including Learning About Japan Through Manga and Video Games, itself a manga, making him one of the few non-Japanese authors to publish a manga in Japan.
Benjamin has worked with publishers including Kawai Juku, Shogakukan, Tokyo University, and Tokyo Institute of Technology, and contributes regularly to media outlets including Netflix, the Yomiuri Shimbun, Metropolis Magazine, the Japan Times, and Time Out Tokyo.
And in 2015, Studio Ghibli published Benjamin's essay, Cool Japan Isn't Cool. This led the Japanese national government to name him a Cool Japan ambassador for the Cool Japan program, in which he advises the Cabinet Office on its outward-facing cultural initiatives. He has appeared on a variety of television programs in this role, including NHK's Tokyo Eye 2020 and Journeys in Japan.
Benjamin also serves as a tourism ambassador for Tokyo's Nakano Ward.
Benjamin holds a second-degree black belt and instructor certification for Aikido from Yoshinkan. He also represents the United States in international competitions of mahjong and took third place in the 2007 Open European Mahjong Championship and second place in the 2008 European Riichi Championship.
So, Ben, it's so great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me back, guys.
So, Ben, what have you been up to recently?
Well, I'm very excited about my upcoming book, which releases October 28th.
So, before you started, you mentioned that you're about to publish your third book in Japanese. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Sure. So the book is titled Nihon wa Kuru, Machigai Darake no Nihon no Miryōku no Hasshin, or in English, it's From Cool Japan to Your Japan. The main idea of the book is that in order to globally market Japan, Japanese producers of both content and tourism attractions should be seeing things from the foreign perspective rather than their own.
And Ben, before we started recording the show, you had particular vernacular for these two different perspectives. What were they called again?
Thanks for mentioning that. So in the book, I use the terms my Japan and your Japan. The title of the book is From Cool Japan to Your Japan. So I think that the trick to marketing Japan is, instead of trying to focus on what's cool or what people want to be cool, they should instead be focusing on what people from other countries already like. And then instead of trying to make them like different things, instead ensure that foreign consumers of Japanese culture can reach the very things that they're already interested in. It's a focus on accessibility rather than anything in particular.
Sounds like you're teaching a class on Marketing 101.
In a way, I am. Many Japanese organizations could probably use a refresher in Marketing 101.
I don't think they ever took it.
Yeah, it's not taught here.
It's
that
very
well.
charitable of you to say, Parker.
I mean, how many times as long-term foreign residents of Japan, and all three of us fall into that category, I believe, have we ran into some wacky Japanese promotion for some random thing aimed at foreigners that no foreigner would ever want to buy, do, or see? It's everywhere.
No, it's absolutely everywhere. I mean, I'm told, oh, Ben, Americans love this thing, as I'm shown something that I've never seen before. Or I see a movie advertised with I love this catchphrase, Zenbei ga naita, all of America cried, like after seeing this movie. And I look at the ad and I'm like, well, I've never seen the movie.
Yeah, I think I've seen that a couple times as well.
Yeah.
It's very popular catchphrase. And it's if something is being marketed purely domestically, frankly, it's effective. Like, it's an effective move in Japan to kind of appropriate the foreign perspective in order to sell something domestically. And look, I don't have a big problem with that. But when you try to appropriate the foreign perspective to sell something to that very foreign perspective, it's just not going to be very effective at all. It's essentially saying, hey, don't you like this?
It's kind of funny. I remember us having conversations about the very popular Japanese TV show, You wa Nani shi ni Nihon e, or Why Did You Come to Japan? I've been on it more times than I can count. I can't remember if you declined to be on it, Ben, I believe.
Yeah, no, they filmed me, and then they gave me a release to sign, and I haven't signed it yet.
Will they use it anyway? Who nobody knows.
They were very nice about it.
So, Aaron, have you been U'd yet?
So 3 times I've been approached at the airport upon coming back to Japan. One time I did give them like a little bit of a talk, but then after about 5 minutes, I looked at them both and I'm like, guys, please don't put this on the TV. I don't consent. I was so tired, from the long flight back. I don't sleep on planes. So when I get back to Tokyo, whether it's Narita or Haneda, I want to immediately go back to my apartment and crash. I don't want to talk to some,
So I have a funny story related to this, actually. So I went to the airport once to pick up my mom, and I went straight from work. So I was in a suit and tie, no bags, no nothing. Mm-hmm. And apparently the U people thought that this was very interesting. So I got U'd. This was actually the first time I got U'd, and I talked up a storm. I'm like, yeah, my mom's coming to Japan. She's so excited. And they're like, can we interview her? And I'm like, sure, no problem. And she gets off the plane, no makeup, all jet lagged. And I'm like, Mom, welcome to Japan. These people want to interview you for TV. And she's like, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, please, I can be on national TV. And she's like, and I finally convinced her to do it, but she was not a willing contestant.
For sure. I understand her point of view. Yeah.
But the whole premise of this program is that there are all these, wacky foreigners coming to Japan for all these different reasons. And they sort of pick the ones that are the wackiest or the most interesting, and they follow them to wherever they're going.
Right.
And sometimes they follow them all the way across Japan.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing about this program is that it's all about, how foreigners love Japan, but the target audience isn't foreigners. The target audience is Japanese people. So it's sort of like this, look at how popular we are. And it's a hit. The ratings are massive.
I had no idea, but I will comment. The most interesting episodes are the ones where they follow like the guy that's learning Japanese gardening, and he's studying under a Japanese master for 2 months and like living in like a
hut.
A hut. It's something. I've seen some
not
really,
a Pizza Hut, a real hut.
Some wild episodes like that, but
No, it's an entertaining show, and fundamentally, it's a Japanese show. Like, it's produced on a private domestic television channel for domestic audiences who they're selling domestic ads to, or rather the products themselves are being marketed via the channel. And I think that that's fundamental to understand, because it means that the program is not international. That You wa Nanishi ni Nippon e is not going to do very well overseas. Even if you did a very good job of localizing it, it would still be tricky, because the thrust of the show isn't Japan is cool. The thrust of the show is, hey, foreigners love us, which is something that is probably only going to appeal to a primarily Japanese audience. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the mistake that I've seen organizations make, including large organizations like the Cool Japan platform itself, is that they will conflate this program with an actual international program.
It's funny, you and I once went to a Cool Japan event, and there was a speech by one of the producers of this program, which I think basically proves your point. It's like, it's not Cool Japan, but they're presenting it as Cool Japan. I mean, obviously, it's a show that features foreigners who are interested in Japan, but it's not a Cool Japan initiative at all.
That's right. And it gets confusing here, because it's like boxes within boxes. That's why I like to move away from Cool Japan and use these My Japan, Your Japan things. It's My Japan because it's domestically focused. It purports to be about Your Japan, but it's not. It's a My Japan show for a My Japan audience, and that's fine, except that the Cool Japan public-private ship platform, which hosted 200 people to hear that guy's speech, purported itself to be all about Your Japan, all about the foreign perspective. And the funny thing about it is that I think that the person who gave that speech himself was confused. He didn't want to turn down the opportunity. And frankly, I think he did a very good job of speaking about his show. But he knows that his show is about targeting Japan. It's about targeting the domestic perspective. It's not really about marketing Japan to the world, which is what this whole Cool Japan governmental apparatus is supposed to be about, like you said.
Yeah, it's a real can of worms. And to go beyond that, the whole, My Japan equals Your Japan sort of, broken math that the government and various local governments and tourism associations and private organizations seem to abide by has not a negative effect, but sort of a nullifying effect, because you end up with all of these promotions and brochures and catalogs and websites that nobody really wants to look at or read or enjoy because they're just not interesting. Like, for instance, most of the stuff you see that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs publishes in English for ostensibly an international audience, I'd love to see the analytics on that. I'm sure it's not very good.
I think you're absolutely right. And I really like the term nullifying effect, because the thing about these efforts isn't that they're bad. They're not. This is Japan. Almost nothing in this country is bad. But it could be so much better, because there are so many existing fans of Japan who are waiting for good engagement efforts. And if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or any other governmental apparatus was able to reach out effectively to them, those fans would do free PR for Japan that's more effective than anything the government could do.
Yeah, it's really interesting, though, because obviously Cool Japan has been around for a long time now. It got started in the early 2010s?
A little bit before that, depending on which program you're talking about.
But basically, I mean, it continues to exist because, quote unquote, Japan just keeps on getting more popular. But the reality is the initiatives and the popularity are completely disconnected.
It's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. I mean, I think that a lot of people affiliated with these initiatives would want to take credit for the, perceived boom in Japanese popularity. But like you said, this boom in Japanese popularity, whether you believe it or not, it's not happening because the government is telling people all over the world to think that Japan is cool. What I think is that people tend to think that Japan is cool no matter what people tell them. And this has been a pattern that's been going on for over 100 years. No one thinks that Japan is cool because the government tells them to, but nevertheless, if you ask the random person on the street in, say, New York, do you think that Japan is cool? I don't think you're going to get a lot of no's.
Good point. And I mean, this goes back into the Your Japan side, which, we've been talking about the My Japan, which obviously is very skewed, but the Your Japan is just as skewed, right? The perception of Japan by foreigners in foreign lands.
That's right. And it's necessarily so. I mean, if you're not in Japan, your perspective of Japan is going to be limited because it's an image. You're not here. You're only going to know about Japan based on secondhand information, what your friends tell you, what you see in movies. And there's really nothing wrong with that. Like if you've never tried something, but you want to find out about it, of course your knowledge of it is going to be limited. It's even commendable, in fact, that you try to know about it. So in order for someone to engage with Japan, buy into a Japanese brand or come to Japan, they're going to initially have this skewed perspective of what Japan is. And I think that Japan, that is the Japanese apparatus or like these governmental structures, have a tendency to try to correct that, to be like, no, you shouldn't think that about this country, or actually Japan is this. And that's a mistake, in my opinion, because generally speaking, people don't like being told what to do. People like following their own interests. And if you've gotten someone who thinks that Japan is all about anime, or Japan is all about the tea ceremony, or Japan is all about Buddhism, that's great. Tell them to come over here so that they can find more of what they like. And once they're here, they'll find other things to be interested in too. I mean, we're kind of poo-pooing on the government here, but they do some things right occasionally, and their new tourism slogan, endless discovery, I think is spot on. That's all that Japan is about. Once people are here, they'll find all sorts of interesting things. So the trick isn't to tell them what they should be interested in. The trick is to get them here.
Good point. And this highlights, the government originally, before the October 11th announcement, they had these like very, you could get in, but there were all these limitations. And they were like, oh, people don't actually like this. They like to come in and actually be free to do what they want. And how did you say endless
discovery.
Endless discovery. Right?
And, endless discovery, I mean, it's like, it sounds like an advertisement for a TV program, but it does apply very accurately to Japan. I mean, even, you can live here for however long you want to, but you constantly discover new and interesting things. I mean, especially, to be honest, personally, I've gotten kind of tired of Tokyo. But every time I go to some new destination in the countryside or even the same place, I always end up finding new things and going to new places and meeting new people and finding new places to eat and stuff to do. And it's always a new experience every time. And I think that, endless discovery really encapsulates it very well, actually.
I mean, this is a wonderful country. It has so many things to offer to so many different types of people. I mean, Japan is just full of diverse things to be interested in. So to try to pick this or that to be the right thing to promote to all foreign tourists, it's inefficient and maybe even a little bit silly. The more important thing to focus on is that once people come here, they love it and they tend to want to come back. The hurdle is getting them here. People think that Japan is cool, so you don't need to tell them about Japan. Once they're here, they already love it. So you don't have to ensure that their experience is a positive one, because it basically already happens automatically. The trick is to kind of get them over this hump of thinking that they can go to Japan. And it tends to be surprising what keeps people back. Like in the United States, I think McKinsey did a survey on this back in 2016 to try to focus on exactly how to convert people from considering Japan as a travel destination to actually visiting. And I believe that they found that one of the biggest hurdles was the perception that Japan was expensive.
Well, they definitely don't have that problem right now.
Not even now, but not even before the yen got super cheap. I mean, you can stay in a nice hotel in the middle of Tokyo for less than $100 easy. I mean, now you can stay for less than $50, but you can't say this about a major travel destination in the United States, like say in New York or like Providence, Rhode Island. I once stayed at a decent hotel for $200. If I had paid the same $200 in Japan right now, I could stay at the Ritz-Carlton. Japan is not as expensive as many potential tourists think it is. And that itself is actually the biggest issue in converting American tourists. It's just telling them that Japan is affordable, which you would think wouldn't be that complicated. And yet I still know people who think that Japan is too expensive to come to right now.
That is hilarious, but also I can totally imagine it because Japan does have this very, distant, far away, hard to get to sort of, it's on the other side of the world. And also, I think a lot of Americans and maybe Europeans to this extent still have this sort of 1980s image of Japan as this, very rich and inaccessible and just, out of the reach of the ordinary Joe.
I think that that's absolutely right. People's perceptions of anything, but perhaps Japan in particular, they tend to get a little bit calcified. And when you're here and you're in the middle of all of it, it's easy to forget that someone from outside of Japan who, say, visited here in like the 1980s is still going to remember the 1980s Japan. And that's what they're going to tell their friends. That's what they're going to tell their kids. People who come over here on expat packages and are used to only living life within, one of the more luxurious parts of Tokyo. That's the experience that they're going to bring back with them. And so it shouldn't be all that surprising that people considering a visit who have never been here might have these misperceptions, but it's a golden opportunity to correct them.
Yeah, that's a travel campaign the Japanese government should do. Japan is dirt cheap. It's so cheap you'll want to slap your mama.
So when the government decides to put out any particular form of messaging, and I think, Parker, you know this better than most and probably even better than me, it's interesting in that they'll consider external stakeholders like their target audience. But before that, they'll consider internal stakeholders first. Like the government cares more about how they think they sound than how they actually sound to the people who they're talking to. And so because of that, I don't think that they'll out and out say that Japan is cheap because they themselves don't want to think that it's cheap. Trying to tag on the affordable, adjective at the end of a branding exercise like Japan, captivating, mystical, affordable, that sort of a thing, like throwing it in, I think has the potential to have legs. But if any Japanese government official actually made a public statement saying that Japan is cheap, the first thing that would come into my mind would be, what a brave person. Because the people around that person are not going to like what he said.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I mean, it's so obvious right now at almost 150 yen to the dollar that Japan is the best travel deal in the world right now.
Yeah.
And you can come to this country where things can be very expensive and have fancy experiences for 2/3 of what it would normally cost. I mean, it's literally like Japan is having a 40% off sale on everything.
And that's what I've been telling my friends, 40% off everything. You're probably not going to have, I think it's going to last for another 6 months or so. But, it's going to be corrected eventually.
Hey, you can reserve the hotels now at the current price, right?
There you go. There you go.
So, Ben, you said that you were recently made a Cool Japan producer, but are no longer a Cool Japan ambassador. What's up with that?
I'm not sure myself. I mean, I don't know if I should really be saying this on a recorded program, but I never really quite understand what that program is trying to do with this external branding efforts. I mean, I think it's good that they're doing a rebranding. If you go to cjpf.co.jp, you'll see that they've integrated videos into their homepage. I'm sorry, this is the Cool Japan public-private partnership platform. The program, yeah, I know. The program that I'm affiliated with, and they've rebranded themselves as CJPF, and as part of that rebranding, they've taken their ambassadors and they've made them into producers. And I think that my responsibilities are going to increase. Like, they've already asked me to help them spread the word about the CJPF award, which, if you are a listener of this program, you are probably eligible to apply for. And frankly, you have an excellent shot at getting, simply because it, like many other Japanese governmental programs, are severely underapplied. Parker and I went to the award ceremony for last year's winners, and we didn't get the impression that it was incredibly competitive.
Indeed.
So the way that they've set up the program is that they have two categories, the video category and the project category. And in both of them, the government is looking to highlight projects or visuals that help brand Japan to international audiences in a new way. This could presumably apply to virtually anything that involves Japan and foreign markets. So if you have a nice brand video about your own product, or if you want to tell the story of how you successfully led a market entry into Japan or outside of Japan, you could very well apply for the program, and by virtue of being one of few applications to originate from outside of Japan or even the Japanese governmental apparatus, I think you will have a good shot at winning.
Do you have to have a proven record, or can it just be an idea?
I think you actually have to do something in reality. I mean, check the actual fine print, not just the podcast for this, cjpf.co.jp/award, I think. It has to be initiated after April 2021 or ongoing. As to whether or not you've done anything in reality, as long as you can show a paper trail that you have been doing it, you may very well be able to apply. If I was the judge for this event, and I'm not, but I have been for similar events in the past, I would look at what you tried to do in reality. But hey, I can't read the minds of the current judges.
Right on.
So, this award here, do you, get any money?
I actually don't remember. Do you remember if they announced any cash prizes at that award ceremony?
Nope.
My guess is if they do award some sort of a cash prize, it probably isn't that significant. The main reason to aim for the award would be the prestige of saying that the Japanese government called you cool.
Definitely.
As long as I'm plugging this program, if anyone out there is an aspiring cartoon artist, a manga artist, you should definitely consider the Japanese government's International Manga Award. The applications for it, I think, tend to open in the summer, but the award ceremony happens in February, and it's a blast because it attracts these really interesting applicants from all over the world. And again, it's a program that is underapplied. Like, simply by applying with a professional level manga, you have a good shot at winning. The Japanese government will invite you to Japan, throw you this great awards ceremony where, the Minister of Foreign Affairs compliments you on drawing comics, and then they give you a little tour of the country for a week. It's pretty neat.
That's lit.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, a few years back, Taro Kono was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and because he's such a down-to-earth guy, after he said nice things about the comics, he actually hung out during the reception and talked with us about what his favorite comics were. Just eating finger food with everyone. He's great.
Taro Kono is such a cool guy.
Yeah. Can we tag him in the podcast somehow?
Yeah, listen to our podcast, Kono Sensei.
If he's not too busy getting the My Number cards linked up.
No, but if you don't call him Kono Taro instead of Taro Kono, he will be offended. So.
In like all capital letters, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's the Kono has to be in capital letters.
You're not allowed to put the Taro in capital letters?
Depends on how fancy you're feeling.
So, Ben, as a Japan tourism expert, what do you think about Japan's recent decision to reopen to tourism travel on October 11th? Do you think it will take a while for tourism to come back, or do you think we're going to see a sudden influx of tourists?
So the headline for this is that if you're listening to the podcast and you're considering coming to Japan, now is really the time to come. It's cheap. And the crowds that Japan was a little bit infamous for in recent years probably aren't going to be happening anytime soon, because the plurality, most of the international tourists who made up the boom in the recent decade came from China and South Korea. And currently, Chinese citizens will have a really hard time visiting Japan. So a lot of the sites that used to be full of Asian tourists are not going to be as full right now. And if you're listening to the English language podcast, my guess is that you probably have permission to come here as a tourist. Now is the time to come.
And this is an interesting tidbit too, because I had misunderstood the news and I thought China was not on the list of countries allowed back in. But before the podcast, you mentioned that they are on the list, but they can't come because of their own government?
My understanding is that the restrictions preventing Chinese tourists from entering come from the Chinese government, not the Japanese government.
Gotcha.
It's something called the Zero COVID policy.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They locked down entire cities.
I heard about that a few months ago. I didn't know this was still a
I saw a video on YouTube or something of people like doing a mad dash to leave a Costco because they were going to lock it down because of COVID.
Wow.
And if you get caught inside the Costco... and
you ain't leaving.
You ain't leaving. and I was thinking, why? It's got everything you need in large quantities.
If you had to be locked down somewhere.
They've even got grills in the back. I mean, come on.
I mean, to speak more broadly on the tourism reopening, I think it's a long time coming. I've seen, friends express frustration that Japan had kept its borders closed for far longer than many other countries had. And I think it's you can kind of see it both ways. Like on the one hand, yeah, Japan really took its time. But on the other hand, the fact that people would express frustration means that Japan's brand is so strong that people still want to visit, despite not being able to for years. Like the fact that they're frustrated means that they still really like coming here. I mean, I think one of the most unfortunate things to happen from Japan being closed off was many students who were the recipient of Japanese government grants to Japanese universities were not able to enter Japan and had to virtually study at those universities, from very different time zones virtually. And it was awful. And I don't necessarily think that it was the best policy to enact, but what I think is also important to see is that many of those students put up with it. People are very, very interested in this country, and even though the Japanese government has a far from perfect record in engaging with foreign audiences and in communicating to them, fans from Japan persist regardless. It's not good to take them for granted. But on the other hand, I think it's good to remember that even when Japan makes mistakes, people still love Japan.
Yeah, honestly, I think the tourism rebound is going to be a lot more sudden than people think it is. Obviously, the first wave are going to be people who have been biting at the bit to get back into Japan, as in repeat tourists. Obviously, these people have been waiting for this day to come, and as soon as they saw it, they booked their tickets. But I think as news of Japan being reopened hits the world, and obviously it happened on October 11th, so my guess is it was probably on the news around the world around that time. That's when people are going to be like, oh, I can go to Japan now.
Right.
Sweet. Let's go.
And Ben, you brought up a great point. I have so many friends that I never would have thought would have visited Japan, but in my 11 years here now, many of them they haven't just come here once. They've come here. So I have some friends that come here every year now, and they have been messaging me for the past 2.5 years, like, when is it actually opening? Because as we know, the Japanese government's very bad at making those kinds of announcements clear for everyone to understand. So there's been lots of confusion as well as to, like, when is it actually open, quote unquote, right?
That's a really good point. And so it was announced that Japan is fully reopening to tourism from, I think, like 67 or 69 countries on September the 22nd at the New York Stock Exchange. And it opened from the 11th. They only gave people like 2 weeks.
Yeah. And all those travel companies that have to get all their resources back. I have some friends at HIS and JTB, and it's a nightmare right now.
I would not want to be working one of those desks right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it surprises a lot of people, but the Japanese government is not a monolith. It's many different sub-organizations that often compete with each other for resources. So when people lament that the Japanese government won't tell them what's going on, it's often because the particular ministry that's in charge of communicating it itself doesn't know what's going on because it's waiting on another ministry for information.
Right.
Yeah, this is a really good point. Like when the prime minister announced that, business travel was reopened, none of the consulates knew anything. And I was assisting clients trying to get into the country, and the consulates were like, wait. We don't know what's going on yet. Please wait. And they're like, no. We got to go to Japan on business right now. We have stuff to do.
I mean, this is kind of like giving away the golden egg here. So Parker, maybe you want to strike this part from the podcast later, but a lot of questions that are like, hey, why does this happen in Japan? Or what's going on in Japan? Or why are they doing this? Are difficult to answer because no one knows the answer to them. Even the organization that's responsible for enacting the decision doesn't necessarily know what they're doing until it's done. This happens quite frequently. And you could see it happen with the travel policies regarding the pandemic. I think last year, what was it? I think Japanese airlines were given instructions to halt flights for nationals until it was remanded directly by the prime minister's office. Am I remembering this right?
There was a time, yes, I remember this. A couple friends were trying to fly back to Japan, and they couldn't board. They couldn't get on the planes.
Am I remembering this accurately, Parker?
Yeah, they stopped the planes.
And they weren't supposed to. And the prime minister's office had to get involved?
Basically.
It doesn't often happen so transparently, but it happens more often than you think. It's very important in Japan to be patient about things, not necessarily because stuff needs to be waited out, but because people don't often know what's happening. And so in order to be able to tell you what's happening, they themselves need to see it happen first.
Yeah, well, I think it just goes back to the fact that, we all know why Japan was kept shut for so long, and it has a lot to do with public opinion. Until recently, Japanese public opinion was that, COVID was a foreign thing and Japan had relatively low cases. And if we let foreign tourists back in, they're going to bring in a lot of COVID and everybody's going to get COVID. And then Japan, by themselves, without any foreign tourism, magically became one of the COVID hotbeds of the world. And still, they didn't reopen to tourism. And I also find it kind of hilarious that the prime minister made the announcement to reopen the country when he was in America. And he announced it at 3 a.m. local time in Japan. So He announced it on the afternoon of the 22nd in New York at the New York Stock Exchange, but it was 3 a.m. on September the 23rd, Japan time. So it's like the prime minister was so scared that this was going to, tickle the wrong nerve with the Japanese public that he had to be on the other side of the friggin' world to make the announcement at 3 a.m. local time.
Oh, that is definitely one strategy to target your Japan without letting my Japan get in the way of the communication.
Good point. Do you think him doing it at the stock exchange had anything to do with, the Japanese government trying to prop up the yen right now? I mean, why do it at the stock exchange? Is this like a normal thing?
I mean, you'd have to ask the prime minister's office. You want me to give them a call? I'm sure they'll give you a straight answer.
I just told you were open. Why aren't you buying yen?
No, it is curious. Like, the NYSE isn't exactly a symbol of tourism.
Exactly.
But I guess where else is he going to do it? Can't really do it in front of the Statue of Liberty. Then people would go to New York.
It is a nice statue, though.
Yeah, no, they have replicas in this country. You can come
Lots
to
of
Japan
them.
just to see all the multiple replicas of the Statue of Liberty.
That would be an awesome episode of You.
Actually, we can call them up and pitch them on it. That could be a lot of fun. Do a pilgrimage of the mini statues of liberties.
Why did you come to Japan? I want to see all the mini statues of liberty. I've heard there's a lot of them. I want to see them all.
I'm a collector, I collect photographs of strange things. I've been to Japan 50 times, so this time I'm doing Statue of Liberty tour.
I have met people who aren't very dissimilar from the impression that you just made, Aaron. And God bless them. Like, this is the country for obsessions, for the country for niche interests. Like,
Absolutely.
if you want to go to the world's only emporium of used wigs for your wooden doll, like, you are going to Nakano Broadway. You're not going anywhere at all. Like, there is no other country in the world that has a place where you can shop for that and used Power Rangers action videos, Ghibli memorabilia, and 10 different scoops of ice cream on a single cone.
That sounds dangerous.
It's delicious.
And these are the best episodes of, Why Are You in Japan? These people, from Italy or Germany or US, wherever, Brazil, and they're here for just some super random, wild thing that Japan has a lot of.
I mean, even each municipality has its own manhole covers. I mean, somebody's got to be obsessed with that.
There's books. There's photo books of manhole covers in the country. So, if you want to take those photos, you have to come here, right?
I'm sure, engineers come here too, interested in that kind of stuff.
I came from Birmingham, Alabama. I heard y'all got all different kinds of manhole covers, and I came to steal one of each different type. I'm going to put them in a container and put them around my farm.
It makes me wonder if there's some sort of budding entrepreneur who would start a service to do that for you.
I have a friend that came to Japan to get a tattoo.
I'm not surprised by that, but the traditional style, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think this goes back to the my Japan, your Japan thing, right? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, Japan is not the place to come to get tattoos. But people abroad think,
Why not?
Oh, am I totally wrong on this one?
Well, I mean, Japan has this traditional way of doing tattoos, which is extremely painful. And that's how the gangsters, get their tattoos done.
Yeah. He
and
got a big dragon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they want to get these, gangster-ass tattoos. Meanwhile, in Japan, it's no, don't promote that. That's Japan gang culture. We don't want people thinking Japan's full of gangsters.
No, that's that. I think Parker's hit the nail on the head there. That is something that I think someone who wants a traditional tattoo done has a good reason to come to Japan. But, it'll be a cold day in hell when you see the government promoting that, like especially the national government promoting it of its own accord, just because of the domestic connotations of tattoos, of gangster, illegal culture. I mean, you see the same thing with, gambling. Like there's international mahjong tournaments that specifically use the Japanese rules. Fans come from like dozens of different cultures, different countries to participate in these big tournaments. They held one in Las Vegas in 2017. I think they had something like 24 countries. A full fourth of the players was specifically invited from Japan, which is the only country invited that had professional mahjong players. So these players are like worshipped by the rest of the tournament. And yet the government's not going to touch any sort of international mahjong event because within Japan, it's a degenerate gambling game.
Right.
But bureaucrats happen to like gambling at it.
But yeah, the very people who would condemn it as a degenerate gambling game are themselves degenerate gamblers. When you think about it, it's not ironic at all.
Yeah, like Baptist preachers going home and getting drunk on Jim Beam.
Essentially so, although I don't think you'll ever hear a government bureaucrat say that they don't gamble. They'll just say that other people shouldn't promote gambling. They're not in conflict with each other.
Known unknowns and unknown knowns.
That's pretty much it.
But Ben, to put it, I'm trying to fit everything into the context of your new book and the vernacular that you're using. The My Japan, Your Japan. The Your Japan would be the more gambling, mahjong, tattoos, elements that lure them over here. And then once they're here, you can introduce them into other things that are actually the My Japan wants to promote, right?
Not necessarily, no. You can try to introduce them once they're here. It might work and it might not work. What I think works is depending on people to follow their own interests. I mean, I was first interested in video games. That's what got me over here. Now I do a whole lot of other things that have nothing to do with video games, but I didn't do it because someone was like, hey, Ben, you should put down the Nintendo and, get into martial arts. I did it on my own, and that's why tourists come here. Like, tourists might say that they come here to learn about Japan's magnificent culture, but that's not why people do anything during their leisure times. They do stuff during their leisure times generally to have fun. So most tourists coming over here are coming over here because they see themselves enjoying a part of Japan. If during that enjoyment of, tattoo getting or ice cream eating, they discover something else that they're interested in, maybe they'll go ahead and try that. And if the people who market that market the accessibility and ease of getting into it, then they may very well get interested in it. But this paradigm of saying, once we get them over here, then we can get them interested in the real Japan, it's possible, but it's also, it might not work the way that you think it does.
That's kind of funny. It reminds me of the first time I came to Japan. I was 15 years old, and I had to go to this store that specialized in used boomboxes. It was like the only store in the world at the time that had this massive selection of vintage boomboxes from like the 80s. And I stuffed a big-ass boombox in my suitcase and went home with a grin on my face.
Where's the boombox now?
In America. It's too heavy to bring back.
Well, you can buy another one at the used boombox. Where is the used boombox store?
Koenji.
Cool.
But they closed.
Ah, it's too bad.
I would have so many boomboxes, it's probably good. I love boomboxes.
When I first came here in 2001, it was, during the early times of the internet when English was still funny. You look at funny Japanese approximations of English, and apologies, this is high school humor, but like I was determined on my first trip to Japan to visit what I thought was like the holy grail of English, which is a fashion shop called Violence Jackoff.
That's pretty good.
It closed right before I got here. I was heartbroken.
That is tragic. I remember being in line to visit the Imperial Palace right next to a couple. And, I thought it's the Imperial Palace. People probably come dressed nicely. My mother and I went together. We were, dressed for the occasion. And I saw this Japanese couple, And I swear to God, this is 100% true. The man was wearing a t-shirt that had on it in big, bold letters, "Too drunk to fuck." This is where the emperor lives, listeners.
You did one of the free tours where you like register your passport in advance?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that is definitely one of the hidden gems of Tokyo. Like, it's free. Anyone can sign up for it. You just have to give the Imperial Household Agency like your passport number, via their era, circa 1997 like website. and it's a remarkably well done tour. I'll always remember the initial explanation. Not only is it multilingual, but there's also a little video of like a sign language interpreter. It's actually really well done. But you wouldn't know about it unless you heard about how to sign up on this, difficult to use website.
And now you know.
Now you know.
Yeah. But please don't wear one of those t-shirts. It's really disrespectful. Even though Japanese people do it. So, Ben, thank you so much for coming on Tokyo Wave again. And in closing, do you have any shout outs or mentions you would like to make?
Thanks again so much for having me. For anyone interested in finding out more about the book, it's called From Cool Japan to Your Japan. If you go to the website that's the same as my name, www.benjaminboas.com, you can sign up for my newsletter, learn more about the magnificent differences between my Japan and your Japan. You mentioned a shout out to someone. Shout out to my website team, Stefan and Patrick. You guys are awesome.
All right, Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, listeners, that's right. You listener right there.
Who do you think should be our next guest on Tokyo Wave? Let us know. Drop us a line at wave@tokyowave.jp.
We hope you enjoyed Tokyo Wave.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Join us again next week on Tokyo Wave.